Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Mental Health Awareness Month conversation. I have a fantastic and exciting sit down today with Zamo Mbele from Panda, and we're going to have a conversation about mental health, particularly in South Africa, because we are South Africans, and just mental health access, which is something that is so important. You know, it's great to talk about mental health, but it's also important to talk about how to take care of that mental health and where we can go to take care of the mental health. So, Zamo, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you are as excited as we are.
I'm very excited, not only to be having this conversation, but also to be beginning an engagement with you, I think, around these topics.
Yeah, no, this is one of my most favorite conversations, because I always really talk from a personal perspective, and I know I don't exist in isolation, and these the challenges that I have with my mental health are not something that is unique. You know, a lot of us go through this, so I'm really looking forward to this. So you are a clinical psychologist, you're a registered clinical psychologist, and I saw somewhere that you are a candidate psychotherapist as well.
Sure. So let me kind of go through that, and it kind of answers some of the questions that we have today, right? And I'll tell you why, because I think that one of the conversations you want to have is around access to mental health care in South Africa. And a good place to begin is how the South African landscape feels very young in the mental health care space, right? And one of the ways that you can see it is that we're still not familiar as a society around what is a psychiatrist, who's different to a psychotherapist, who's different to a psychoanalyst, who's different to a psychologist, and what type of psychologist do you get, and da. So when we have this conversation, you and I think we're doing something really helpful in unpacking what am I and what do I do and what are the differences, because I think it allows people to know a bit better who they should be speaking to. And I think that's both for the access of mental health care, but it's also for individuals who may be interested in training as a psychologist and so on and so forth. You are particularly interested in Black wellness or wellness in Black spaces. So I think I can say in this forum that one of the missing things, I think, in the Black community is there aren't psychologists in the family who are uncles and aunts and grandparents and cousins who, where you're young and you are aspiring to become a psychologist, you could easily give a call to and say, what's the difference between psychiatrists and psychologists? So we need to have this conversation until there are more Black psychologists and there are more Black people in families who are aunts and uncles and all of those people to be answering these questions. The long and short of the answer is I am a clinical psychologist. I trained as a clinical psychologist, and I then worked as a clinical psychologist in hospitals mostly. And to work as a clinical psychologist, you really are working in a hospital and you're helping with psychiatric patients, so individuals who are really struggling, most of them on medication, not all, and needing kind of high-level intervention from a clinical psychologist. I also work as a psychotherapist, and it's a little bit of a synonym. And that's where I offer psychotherapy, which is talk therapy, not only to very ill individuals, but also to professionals like you and me, wanting to just figure things out or wanting to be better at certain things or so on and so forth. So a clinical psychologist can do psychotherapy, which is what I've been doing by and large. And what I'm training as is a psychoanalyst, which is a little bit different. Yes. A psychoanalyst is a little bit different from a psychotherapist in the sense that a psychoanalyst's approach is much more to unconscious processes. So it relies on the idea that we'll engage, you and I will talk about 4 times a week, and we'll figure out deeply unconscious processes of yours that influence your daily life. And the more you can be aware of them, maybe the more in control you can be of those deeply unconscious processes. So I've taken us through those 3 different categories. Clinical psychologist, most of what people imagine a psychologist is, can perform psychotherapy. You can refer to yourself as a psychotherapist, but then there's also psychoanalyst, which is much more in depth and much more demanding. So that's who I am, yes.
And what encouraged you to get into this space in the first place? Maybe we could start off on a personal note. You know, as a Black man, is this something that you grew up around, and what built your interest in, you know, being active in the space?
Sure. Kind of encouraged me to go into this world. I was saying to you, Garabo, is that I think that I had exposure and access to the idea that not only can you get sick over and above what you can see on the body, you can get
Mm,
sick with something inside. And
mm,
I also had some sort of exposure to the helping profession at home.
mm,
And that was mostly from let's say, you know, kind of medicine, psychiatry, nursing, but also even an engagement with something like um, isangoma, which we have in my family.
mm,
And again, this idea that actually we can talk, we can engage, and we can help.
mm,
And we can also kind of help in ways that are not easy to see, you know? So
mm,
sometimes psychology and psychoanalysis in particular, I oftentimes say is always not too dissimilar to consulting Nesangoma, because I might be able to say and see things in the unconscious, which
mm,
are not clear to see. So I think that I really owe it to my previous generations, and I want to pay homage to them, that having people who are in the helping tradition and helping professions in different ways, both in terms of an Africanism as well as a Westernism, must have given me an idea that that is a helping way. I think I also recognized very clearly, very early, that there weren't enough Black people in the profession,
mm,
and I think I had the privilege to be able to take up that challenge to be one of the first few Black people. And I'm just going to wrap this up and then we'll rejoin the link.
yeah.
And I think I found it very interesting, and I don't want to shortchange that. And maybe interesting is shortchanging it. I think I just found a passion
Mm,
for it. And I think it's important to say this because it's been said to me many times. Apparently, I'm passionate about this. Though I think it's also important to say this because I'm not just doing it for the other or for the world. Thank goodness it has an impact on the other in the world. Though I really love what I do,
mm.
which is to help people in this way.
No, and we are grateful. We're grateful for your work. So one thing that I was not aware of, right, as a Black person growing up, is that you can actually be sick in your mind. Like that was nothing I was exposed of. And you said, you know, as a country, mental health advocacy and knowledge is something that, you know, we still in our infancy. It's still a new concept for us. But as Black people in particular, do you think we've made some progress, you know, progressive steps towards a better understanding of mental health, and particularly away from the stigmatization of mental health? Because for us, being ill in the head is, you know, it's something to be ridiculed. Like we are shanya, you know, Sterkfontein, you know, those are the general jokes you hear around the Kasi where I grew up around mental health. So have we made progress in that regard?
Sure. I think we have. I think that the quick, easy answer is we've made progress.
Mm,
I think the fact that the two of us are having this conversation really truly tells us we've made
yeah.
progress. Really, I think it is, you know. Um I really oftentimes believe in trying to find processes which seem abstract and say, do we actually have evidence, or are we kidding ourselves?
Mm,
So if two young Black professionals can be speaking on mental health in the way that we are, apparently we've made progress.
mm.
I'll tell you where we come from. So if you bear with me a little bit, I want to take 5 minutes and give a bit of a
Cool.
Mbele history of where do we come from.
Yes, please.
Cool. I oftentimes speak about, I say, how is it that we as Black South Africans, even continentally, would imagine that to have an internal world is not for us.
Mm,
And I say, and I think I have evidence for this, it starts off in the colonial project.
mm,
And in the colonial project, what we get is that if you have to convince an entire continent of people, as in the continent of Africa, um, everybody on the continent, that they have to come onto a ship, travel across to a new continent, and work as slaves
Mm.
and work as slaves for centuries. One of the things that you have to do is you have to convince them that they don't have an internal world.
Mm.
Because if you have an internal world, you're going to think about this and you're going to say, I don't think this is a good idea. And you're going to feel that this is not good. And you're going to feel a huge amount of sorrow. And you're also going to feel angry. And you're not going to work, right? It's an impossible task. So the first thing you do is you convince them you don't have an internal world. You just have a muscle and bronze, that's all you have.
Yeah.
And that way you can take shiploads, millions of people across millions of miles and force them to work for hundreds of years for free. And it starts there, and it shows itself even in a more contemporary political social way, where a lot of Black leaders say things like, oh, depression is a white thing, and do not imagine that they are speaking the residue of a colonial project that also showed itself in apartheid. So in apartheid, a similar thing happened. If you have an internal world, we have to know that you are suffering. And if you have an internal world, you will know that you're suffering, and then you may have to do something about it. But if you imagine that a Black child cannot read more than a certain stage because they don't really have an internal world, then you are justified in doing all of the heinous bad things. And then the Black child doesn't have to say, wait, hold on, I don't feel good about this, or I don't think this is a good idea. In many ways. So I hope you can kind of see how I'm saying the project is you can't have an internal world, and therefore you cannot be upset, you cannot be suffering, you cannot be sorrowful. You just keep going with it.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say one quick thing, in my history lesson. This is a big thing, because I think that when I hear that in South Africa, 80-something% of learners in grade 4 cannot read for understanding, I take in my mind that the legacy of Bantu education, which said, you do not have an internal world, has been inherited by our current leaders too. So there isn't enough kind of outrage in saying Black children deserve to be able to read for understanding, because they also have an internal world. They have a mind and a heart. Now that's to some extent the back end of this problem. How it shows itself front end, right? Like you were saying, in the streets, ekasi, is that then when a person does have a psychiatric or a psychological condition, we're not going to take it seriously because they don't have an internal world. They don't deserve a doctor, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a counselor to say something inside has gone wrong. And therefore, let's attend to it, right? Instead, they are mocked. The alternative to mocking somebody who is untreated with psychosis in the streets is to say something has gone wrong inside of that person and we need to take them to hospital. So in order to do that, you have to punctuate from the fact that Black people, poor people, disenfranchised people have an internal world in the same way as anybody else. And something can go wrong, and therefore we need to do something with it. But also something can be done in a progressive, helpful way in many ways. And I could go on speaking, including something like understandings and languages, Because like people oftentimes say, there's no word for depression in a vernacular. If that is true, it's because the vernacular was taught. You don't have an internal world. So why do you have to develop a word for depression?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I speak a lot about, to say, sometimes it's so important to have a vocabulary to describe stuff, because if you don't have a vocabulary, then it's like those things don't exist. And I think we've made such progress with that, right? But also you speak to something so important, right, about the residue of our history, and the trauma that we have experienced as a people. Slavery, apartheid. I think for my conscious parenting journey, that's what I speak to so much, to say that's our history, that's our legacy, that's what built a template of how we relate to ourselves and how we relate to our kids. But do you think our history and kind of the residue of what we have experienced makes Black people in particular more susceptible to mental illness, particularly depression and anxiety?
Absolutely. And I'll explain why. I'll kind of walk us through the whys and the hows. I think the first one is I think we cannot underestimate that with evolution. So I'm going to speak firstly from quite a medicine scientific place, and then I'm going to go through, I hope, to a lot more social. What we know, right, is that genes write themselves inside of us, genetics, because of what's happening outside of us, right? And that's important. That's important to say. So parenting, for example, what we know is that we see over generations that if you had a generation where there wasn't enough food, a couple of generations later, the children born will have genetically more capacity to store food because they anticipate scarcity. Right? So what happens around us learns, it converts, and it's written in genes inside of us. We also see that if people leave the continent of Africa, generations later, they need less melanin in their skin because it's less sunny. And so, they appear race white. So if we take that for granted, we can imagine that if you have generations of depressed people because they are downtrodden and they are mostly Black, apparently the gene of depression might write itself into Blackness, actually, in the same way as those other genes I was referring to. And let me make another example. And if you have a condition where Black people cannot always feel safe and secure, and they have to look out, and they're in danger because they're living in dangerous areas, though they're also in danger because the authorities are against them. The gene of anxiety, which is really hypervigilance and making certain that I'm safe and secure, might write itself into the body. So my first long-winded answer that I'm trying to be as clear as possible is to say something like, if there are generations of suffering, pain and suffering to a particular people, it's not silly to imagine that genetically they may be more susceptible to experiencing pain and suffering, So that's a first answer. The second one is, there's also something about access to care. So I speak with different communities, and I must tell you, if I'm speaking to a very conservative Afrikaans community at an NGK, they too say our people don't speak about mental health. If I'm speaking to a very, very conservative, a Muslim community, invited, they too will say, our people don't speak about mental wellness and illness. In fact, if I even speak to a very WASP, very, very upper lip, Kate's, the royals actually have written about this. We don't speak about we keep it every single kind of. So the difference, I think, for Blackness is around access to care, which might disrupt that not speaking about it. And so we know, I think you and I know, Karaba, that historically resources were not given to Black people. And therefore, even if you want to speak, even if you want to investigate, even if you suspect that there's something wrong with you, if the resources, hospitals, human resources, social workers, and also social resources, conversations like we're having, if those three things and others are not easily available to you, you are less likely to disrupt this idea that we don't speak about it. And so where Black people have been further hard done by is the fact that they have not been given enough access to resources in order to disrupt the status quo. That says that you will suffer of illness by yourself, in your own kind of silos. And to this extent, the crime is the fact that to this day, even with the leadership that we have, we still have a conservative stat that says there's one clinical psychologist to about 100,000 South Africans. To put that into an image, it's one of me and all of Soccer City, FNB, one of me and Soccer City packed to capacity. That is the state of mental health in South Africa and the lack of resourcing. When it comes to psychiatry, I think it's worse. I think it's about 1 to 1/4 million. And if we don't address that resources the lack of resources factor, our people will continue to suffer and not even know that they're suffering.
So I don't take lightly the fact that I'm a privileged Black person, right? With a medical aid, and when I hit rock bottom with my mind and my depression and my anxiety, I was able to, get my 21 days at a psychiatric hospital, and it felt like a little holiday away from my family. But how does a Karabo sitting in her house in Soweto feeling like there's something wrong, man? Like this, I'm just not feeling like myself, because that's how I was feeling as well. I'm extremely sad, and I can't get out of bed, and I don't want to do things. I don't want to see people. Those are like the symptoms of depression. Where does a person like that go? Do I go to my local clinic? When I get there, what do I say? And it's no lie that there's a general negative narrative around our healthcare system. I mean, it's so hard for us as women to go to our clinics and talk about prevention and stuff like that. And how do you start a conversation around mental health? Are our mental health professionals in our neighborhoods? I talk about Soweto a lot because that's where I'm from. Are those professionals trained to have conversations and ask me relevant questions to lead me to a possible diagnosis around my depression? And then after that, where do I go? Considering that I have a penny to my name, but I need help.
Yeah, I think one of the first places to begin is, if we're going to be a bit disruptive, is to say the first place to begin is that you and I should be having these conversations and trying to force them into the spaces where they aren't. Put differently, you and I must make use of our privilege for those who are less privileged. I really believe that one of the signs of an advanced society is when people can do things that are beyond their immediate and obvious interests and needs. Actually, right? So to this extent, what we're doing now, which is putting the conversation on the map, getting it out there, educating people, is so important. Before we even ask that person, what are they going to do? What are we doing? Kind of speaking something to those with power, institutions, organizations, individuals, and saying, what are you doing? Because it matters to us all. And the matter to us all is a different conversation we can have, which is the real impact of mental health in a society untreated on everybody, not just those suffering and struggling with it, on everybody. So we start off by saying, if you have a story, tell it. Whatever it looks like. And if you can help, go for it. And I think that's what we're doing, right? And then I think we can ask, I must say, obviously, because I'm speaking on behalf of Panda, this is one of the reasons that I happily, proudly, strongly, boldly put my name behind the project of Panda, because it's not waiting for those individuals who need help to do something. We are doing something so that they can get the help, trying to improve access to care. So the second point that I wanted to bring is that I do think then that we must make healthcare and mental health care a lot more accessible. And I think we can do that in many ways. And three are the ones that I'm going to highlight very quickly, high level. One, this is what we're doing. We make mental health care conversations, mental health caring conversations, social. We take them out of the kind of ring fenced of being professional and academic, and we make it social. Really kind of pay a lot more attention to how are you doing, what's going on, and we do put these conversations in social spaces so that they can be had a lot more by a lot more people. I think number two, very similar, is that we also do not imagine that the work of mental health is going to be reserved to mental health professionals or practitioners only. Historically, one of the best advances in a human society was the development of social workers, because at that point, society realized that we need people to work specifically for the good of society. Though that was also not such a helpful thing, because it gave society an impression that only certain individuals, this is a problem, or this is something, a challenge for certain individuals, versus this is all our difficulty, our problem. And if it is for us all, then educators or teachers at school will be equipped to look after the mental health of the kids. Pastors, imams, rabbis, anybody who's a leader in a religious institution will be equipped. Ozangoma and other more indigenous healers will also be equipped. Your nursing staff at a clinic who are supposed to be helping with reproductive health will be equipped, to know that a person might be anxious or nervous or shameful to speak of. So what I'm saying is, my second point is, if we don't take for granted that this is something that needs to be looked after by social workers, psychologists, and psychiatrists, and we say, actually, it's for us all, then we will go and equip people to help in every other aspect. So the first one is social. The second one is to say, we cannot imagine that psychologists and psychiatrists are the only custodians of the endeavor of wellness. It is for us all. And then I think the third one is, in fact, to better resource individuals, right? To give individuals who are suffering and struggling better resources. Now, the kind of panacea, or the way that it's usually done, is to ask a government to train more professionals and to create a space where more professionals can work more. And that's a mandate for government. So in the meantime, what we can do, you and I, is we can give as much information to an individual who is struggling. We can give them as much information as to why they're struggling and what are they struggling for, what are they struggling from. Like when you just said, now, I couldn't get out of bed. I didn't want to see people. I mean, I know you say it very quickly, though. You have no idea how incredibly informative this must be for somebody. Like, oh my goodness, I thought I was just being lazy. And I'm glad Karaba has helped me understand that something is up. Or a parent who might be watching this and be like, geez, I feel horrible because I've been shouting at my teenager thinking actually maybe something is wrong. So we go out there and we equip individuals who are struggling with what is going on. And then we also equip them with how to get the help. And again, I think this is where the Panda Project feels so appropriate for me, because essentially you're about 5 clicks away, or 3, from getting help immediately, not bathing, taxi, fully lying, and then see a psychologist. Literally in your hands, wherever you're at. There's an opportunity to help. So if I neaten it a little bit there, and if I work back, I'm saying my third point is that we give individuals who are suffering and struggling as much information as possible, and give them as many resources as possible as doing. And I think that's what Panda does. I think the second point that I make is that we also try and give individuals who are not working directly in the mental health care space, though who could benefit from knowing so much more, we give them so much more information. We do go in anyway. Yeah. And then my first point that I was making was that I think that we do have to, I suppose we have to democratize mental health, essentially, including putting it in social spaces, like we're doing now.
Yeah, I love that. So maybe we can talk about that, right? To talk about how we are already on our phones. We live in such a digital space. So how can these devices actually save our lives? How can we use them to help us through the daily grind of the stuff that we struggle with mentally? Which introduces me to the conversation about Panda, which I got introduced to by a good friend of mine after our admission, and how I was really mind blown. Firstly, that the app is free. And secondly, how jam-packed it is with content and professionals that really articulate some of the challenges that we go through so well, and how interactive the app is. Maybe tell us about Panda and what kind of work you do, and how people can access an app that will kind of save their lives, really.
Sure. I mean, I think you already told us about Panda. That's what Panda is. I mean, I think I'll just It really is. Firstly, I think it's different things for different people, and that's what we're trying to build. Not one thing, but something that's in an aggregate way can be as helpful as possible. What it is our project, our passion project, from some industry leaders and some incredibly hardworking individuals who really truly believe in the idea that we can do better, we can be better. We can do better and we can be better. And we do that in different ways. And we do have an application where you download it, it's completely free. You sign up, you're absolutely anonymous. And you can, I think you can get 4 different things. One is you can get psychoeducation sessions. So we have a forest where we have individuals who are accredited, who give information that's helpful. I also just want to say something about that because, mental health has become a bit vogue and everybody is also speaking about it, and not all of what is being said is helpful. So what we know with Panda, and this is one of my rules, is that what is being said in the forest is in fact accredited. It is helpful. It is good quality and it's not fake or false. And I think that's very important. So you can go on and learn, I guess is what I'm saying. You can also go on and listen. So that's a second thing that we offer, which is support groups. You can go on and listen to what other people are going through and listen to how it resonates for you, and maybe even dare to share, just to unmute and then to kind of say, hey, listen, actually, that really, really resonated. We also have resources, so self-help resources. If you really want to take up a challenge to engage in mindfulness, we have resources where you can do that at any point available. And then we also have a list of experts. If it is that you find that you do want to escalate from what's already available on the app and you do want to make an appointment with an expert, then you can also do that. And that's who we are, and that's what we're doing. And we're doing that, you're right, free for every individual that's really available. We also have a business-to-business offering where we try to help organizations and institutions and say, look, actually, you can work better and improve your bottom line. You don't have to work better and it, actually, yeah. So that's who we are and that's what we do. And if you haven't downloaded the app, please go into the Apple Store and do so right now.
Yeah, I think one of the cool features that you have also is the assessments feature on depression, anxiety, and addiction, because like sometimes you feel that something is wrong, but you can't just get your finger around it. And those assessments are really good to help, set you towards, because it can't be a definite diagnosis, right? You can't get that off of an assessment, but just setting you on a direction of trying to figure out what it is that is challenging you. I think that's really one of the cool features of the app. Why, if I may ask, I don't know if you kind of manage the content on Panda, but every time I log into the app, it asks, how satisfied are you with your life, your overall life, or something like that? And like there's a score from 1 to 10. Why is that such an important thing why is that an important question that you guys ask when you log into the app?
Because it's one of the ways that we are asking you to call attention to yourself. Like it's such it's quite a question. And at the same time, we should actually be asking, yes, we should be asking ourselves that question a lot more and a lot more frequently. So that's one of the thoughts and ideas around it. It's something like that. I also think that it gives you an opportunity to locate yourself and to say, actually, this is where I'm at. And sometimes you can then catch and say, actually, I'm not doing as well as I thought, or whatever the case is. So,
I love that. So if you haven't, please go to joinpanda.com. That's where we find you, right? It's right there. Joinpanda.com and download the app. It's got these 1-hour sessions back to back the entire day. I think until like 8 or 9 p.m. You guys are busy at Panda.
We are. We have a 12-hour offering. We are going to increase it to 14 shortly. In fact, in the future, anyway, we are going to have 1,000 sessions a day in the near future. And one of the ways that we're going to do that is the more people that join, the more we're going to get to that target. And the more people that join and want to host a forest session. And Karabo, you are hosting a forest session, and I'm very, 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 very much looking forward to that. I think to take this conversation Also to our colleagues who are going to be joining us in that session is so important. So yeah, let's join, let's have the conversation.
Fantastic. Zamo, any closing words around mental health and mental health access, particularly for us Odaki in this beautiful country of ours and these dire times that we're living in? Because I was at the gym the other day and I could not, I was by myself, so I was just listening and observing, and sheesh, man, everyone is just struggling. If we're not complaining about electricity, we're complaining about, petrol hikes and how expensive food is and how we're struggling to pay our children's school fees. So we really are going through a lot right now. So any closing remarks just around how we're taking care of our mental health in the current state that we're in?
I'll actually just take your lead and to say something like, I think it's important for us to just kind of come back to something of a basic truth, which sounds intuitive, though it's important to know. To struggle is not a bad thing. It's horrible and it can be painful and frustrating, though it's not a bad thing. To struggle alone is a very lonely thing. And instead to kind of reach out to friends and family, to professionals, so that you don't have to struggle alone is a better struggle than to have to do it by yourself.
Yeah. I love that. That's one of my most, prominent themes in life, is that no one is meant to suffer in silence. No one man is an island. We're not brought into this world to exist in isolation. So I will never suffer in silence. And I hope in my suffering loudly, I can, help others do the same, really, because I don't want us people to be like, okay, so I'm not suffering alone. I want them to realize that they're not suffering alone, and then also do the same for others as well. So Zamo, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to your amazing team at Panda. I cannot wait to engage in more and more and more of these conversations with you and just democratize mental health, right? That's the mission. Thank you so much, and I hope this conversation has been helpful to everyone that has watched. Please share it with your friends and your family, and let's spread the conversation as far and wide as possible, because it is a very necessary conversation. Thank you so much, and we'll chat soon. Thank you so much, Zamo. Bye.
Speak soon. Bye.